And now we're going to segue right into our opening keynote panel. The keynote panel is co-sponsored by the Center for Refugee Studies at York University, so we're very happy to have you as a sponsor. And I'd like to pass on the podium to Christina Clark-Kasek, who is with the Center of Refugee Studies at York, and who will chair this session. Please welcome Christina.
So I'd just like to invite the panelists to take your places. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this opening panel on refugee protection and resettlement in Canada. We are very pleased to be here today. I'm directing the Center for Refugee Studies summer course on refugee and forced migration issues this week, and we're very happy that Harold and his team put on this opening panel and invited us to be a part of it. The panel today is a rich reflection of the diversity of issues that will be covered throughout the conference. We have 4 panelists and 1 moderator. So we don't have a lot of time, and in the interest of time, which I'm told that's my main function as chair, what I'm going to do is just briefly introduce each speaker and his or her title of the presentation, and then I'm going to ask each one to give a 10-minute intervention on their topic. After that, we will have Nicholas moderate the session. So in the order that they are in the program, our first speaker is Dawn Onishenko, who is an assistant professor in the School of Social Work here at Ryerson University, and she will be speaking on sexual minority refugees. The second speaker is Cynthia Levine-Rasky, who is the associate professor in the Department of Sociology at Queen's University, who will be making an intervention talking about Romani refugee claimants here in Canada. The third speaker is my colleague Ranu Basu, associate professor and former undergraduate program director in geography at York University. And she's going to be looking at the importance of public space in the settlement experience of refugees, looking specifically at Scarborough here in the GTA. And the final speaker is Richard Lecourt, who is with Citizenship and Immigration Canada. He's the operations manager for the Ontario region, and he will be giving a brief overview of refugee resettlement from a Canadian perspective. Following that, Nicholas Kung, who is an immigration diversity reporter at the Toronto Star, will be moderating a discussion with some questions from the audience. So I'd like to invite our first speaker, Dawn, to step up to the podium.
Good afternoon. Thank you for being here on this lovely day. So my presentation is looking at the experience of sexual minority refugees. And as I begin my presentation, I just want to say that it is very brief, so there's some statements I might make that aren't contextualized don't benefit from the context of my research and participant interviews. So if you want to ask questions about that after, we can talk about that. So my research explores the proliferation of increased human rights for LGBTQI, so lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgendered, two-spirited, intersex, queer questioning people who are referred to as sexual minorities within this presentation, as it's a more broader, more inclusive term. So we're looking at that, particularly in light of the recent changes to the Immigration and Refugee Act, Bill C-31, and how this has created an increasingly precarious situation for sexual minority refugees seeking refuge in Canada. Okay. So I think this is a particularly important and interesting topic right now, in that I think we're seeing a conflation or collision of a couple of dominant discourses coming together that we're just sort of believing without unpacking and looking at with a critical lens. The first of the dominant discourses is that queer rights, so things like the decriminalization of homosexuality, anti-hate crime laws, even same-sex marriage, are equated or equal to the eradication of discrimination violence for all people. And then the second rhetoric that I think that people we're all sort of accepting is that refugees abusing the system and trying to get refugee status when they do not really need it or deserve it. Actually, I'm going to use this. Next one's taken from the Citizenship and Immigration website. In 2012, Jason Kenney said, "Too many tax dollars are spent on bogus refugees. We need to send a message to those who would abuse Canada's generous asylum system that if you are not in need of protection, you will be sent home quickly." So you can see that rhetoric is really entrenched and ingrained right in our sort of policies and the way that it unfolds. However, Canada has had a long history of being perceived, at least, as welcoming for sexual minorities. It was one of the first Western nations to include the protection of sexual minorities under the Immigration Act, and this occurred in 1992. And often since then, it's been perceived as a welcoming place and a place where refugees, a safe haven for refugees, if you will, for sexual minority refugees. Current context, we see some changes that have occurred, right? So in June 27, 2012, Protecting Canada's Immigration System, Bill C-31, came into law, and I argue that some of the changes that that occurred in that act have a disproportionate negative impact on sexual minority refugees. I think there's quite a few that I could be talking about, and if you come to a later presentation that I'll be doing, I will talk about others. But for the expediency's sake, I'm looking at the two, safe country designation and detainment. So this, again, comes right from the Citizenship and Immigration website, and these are a list of changes that have occurred with the new act. That there will be a list of safe countries that designated safe countries that respect human rights and offer state protection. That refugee claimants from designated safe countries will be fast-tracked, so between 30 and 45 days. They cannot appeal a negative outcome of this decision to the Refugee Appeals Division. However, they can appeal it to the federal court, but they can be removed while waiting appeal. So they're not guaranteed of being able to have their appeal heard. And also they're ineligible to apply for a work permit until their claim is approved. Another significant change under Bill C-31 was that prior to Bill C-31, the onus to prove the willingness or unwillingness of a country to offer state protection was placed on both the IRB and the claimant. However, now the Minister of Citizenship and Immigration determines what is considered a safe country, and they can do this without benefit of committee or human rights experts giving them advice on that. So again, it makes it a little bit precarious of a situation. So some of the implications that I've discovered that I've done a pretty extensive qualitative study with sexual minority refugees, and these are some of the findings that we've discovered. One is that with a shorter timeline, this creates quite a large challenge for sexual minority refugees that are required to present documentary evidence of abuse from their country of origin. And this is particularly true when often people are fleeing countries where it's illegal to be gay or lesbian, or they can be punished by death. So they're in a situation where they're trying to gather this information, but they don't necessarily have it because they've had to hide it for so long. So the shorter timeline makes it very difficult, if not impossible, to put together their case. Secondly, the lack of a work permit. Of course, all refugees seeking asylum incur many expenses related to their claim. Our participants talked about the way in which theirs might be a little bit more complicated in that they often aren't accepted or welcomed by their community and have little community support when they come to Canada. So they're really in a situation where they often have absolutely nobody to rely on and no funds at all, no opportunity to gain employment, however that may be. And as such, they're often forced into precarious, dangerous, or illegal employment. Thirdly, although a country may have a state law that protects same-sex rights, so the ones that I mentioned, decriminalization of homosexuality, anti-hate crime, that does not mean that it's safe for all sexual minority refugees in all countries. So it ignores those private violence claims. So, at the hands of individuals, they're beaten, lives threatened at the hands of family members or community, gender-based roles, forced marriage, all of those things that may still occur, even though legislatively or legally, the laws change to be more inclusive. So of concern is that there was an increase of same-sex rights, right? Okay. That these will wrongly be perceived as confirmation of tolerance, safety, and thus negates the lived realities of sexual minorities. And the designation of safe applies a blanket assumption regarding the safety of all given citizens, which precariously implicates sexual minorities facing persecution within designated countries. I have 3 minutes here. So the second part that I was going to talk about was the detainment, with the minister holding the right to detain refugees designated as irregular arrivals. We think that it's places undue difficulty for sexual minorities, that they face harsh criminal penalties or even death in their countries of origin, and they come here seeking safety, and then they may also be imprisoned when they arrive at Canada's borders. So they're often re-traumatized and re-victimized in the very process where they're seeking solace and safety. So in fact, they may face homophobia and persecution reflective that they faced in their countries of origin. And they may even face it, and this is what we're finding, even at the hands of refugee and immigration officials, and they have no opportunity or no place to voice that or talk about it. So structural implications for sexual minorities are great in that it creates spaces where sexual minority refugees and their advocates cannot or are afraid to expose or challenge homophobic or racist attitudes or actions by those in authority, both systemically as well as institutionally. And systemic homophobia and racism then may be masked or obfuscated. Okay, yeah, okay.